getting your camera on.
Yeah, I think it's because I had another one open. Démarrer video. Ah,
There you
hi!
go.
Cool. Sometimes it doesn't work. I have an old computer, so
Oh, no, it's
Rashad, it's not streaming to the special report.
Passionate, outspoken, insightful. Ariva Martin is an award-winning civil rights attorney, best-selling author, legal commentator, and America's advocate. Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report.
good morning and welcome to our viewers in the US and around the world. To kick off this morning's broadcast, do me a favor. Please share the show with your online friends or start a viewing party. And remember, post a comment or question. Your voice really matters, and I want to hear from you. This morning, we're talking about Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby, once known as America's dad, has won the right to an appeal of his 2018 criminal conviction for sexual assault of Andrea Constand. Remember, Andrea was a former director of the Temple University's women's basketball team, and she made allegations that Bill Cosby drugged her and sexually assaulted her. Now, Pennsylvania's highest court will review the trial court's decision on two key issues in Cosby's 2018 trial. First, the court will review whether the trial judge's decision to allow 5 other accusers to testify about alleged uncharged prior bad acts by Cosby was prejudicial to Cosby's case. The court will also determine whether the trial judge improperly allowed testimony about a civil deposition Cosby gave after he said he was promised by an earlier district attorney that he would not be prosecuted. The 2018 trial against Cosby for sexual assault resulted in a conviction and a prison sentence of 3 to 10 years. Cosby remains incarcerated in a Pennsylvania prison as we speak. Now, some victims and victims' rights advocates call this decision by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court stunning. And they say that this decision can actually test the Me Too movement and future cases pending, including the Harvey Weinstein appeal. Bill Cosby's wife, however, told ABC News Live that last week's decision was the celebration for her of the possibility of vindication. Camille Cosby also called out the Me Too movement, suggesting that it was steeped in racism. A lot to discuss, so let's get at it. My first guest is Nicole Rochelle. She is a singer, an activist, and actress. This former Cosby Show actress was arrested outside of a Pennsylvania courthouse in 2018 after she staged a topless protest during Bill Cosby's sexual assault trial. She had strong reactions to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's recent decision. Good morning and welcome, Nicole.
Hello, welcome.
Oh, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for joining me. Now, you actually were an actress on the former Cosby Show. So tell us, what role did you play?
I played a friend of Rudy and I had a recurring role. So I actually filmed about 5 episodes on the show.
Okay. Now, during that time that you worked on the Cosby Show, you didn't have any negative interactions, did you, with Bill Cosby?
No, I thought he was a great guy. He gave great advice. He was inspiring. I admired him, much like the general public. So it was very surprising to hear the allegations and the accusations and everything that came afterwards.
Yeah, and we know that over the course of about 2 or 3 years prior to the trial in 2018, more than 50 women came out and made accusations against Bill Cosby. Some accusations were with respect to actual rape, some were sexual assault. Did you know any of these women that came forward during this time period?
Not at that time period, no. But later on, I reached out to a few, and I did come to know Lily Bernard a bit.
Okay.
And I met with her in LA, and mostly after the protest, because before the protest, she was very hesitant because she wasn't sure if I was actually a real person or if I was trying to somehow demean her struggle, demean her fight by becoming friends with her. And then it's hard to trust people after you're a victim,
Right.
which I understand. So we met afterward, and we hugged and we cried together, and it was very emotional.
Now, you've heard, I'm sure, the vehement denials by Bill Cosby. He has stated over and over again in public statements and statements issued by his PR team and others that are a part of his team, where he's just said these allegations are false. So why don't you believe him? You just said that you admired him, that you worked with him, that you held him in high regard. So if you held him in such high regard, why don't you believe his denials?
Well, I think there's something in particular that's very different about this case, because I'm not just going to go and believe every single case that I hear uh, about anything. You have to do a bit of research, which makes sense. And in this case, there are over 60 victims that have come forward at this time. And I say victims and not accusers because evidence shows and statistics have shown that not more than 2 to 10% of rape victims ever lie. These women are completely different. Anything you can say about one victim that you try to discredit them on does not apply to another victim. There are different races, there are different jobs. Why would they all be clout chasers if they all have different jobs and some are teachers or nurses, or not everyone was in show business. So no, they all didn't go to get famous. And no, they all weren't white women plotting against the black man, because there were black victims and there were mixed victims. And there is always something that goes against these claims that try to vindicate Bill Cosby. Like, the math speaks for itself. And there's the hashtag not so good at math that's related to this case. And that's the one I really cling to, because the math shows it. It shows it all. It's not like a case where there's 1 or 2 victims. There are so many victims over a 50-year period of time. For me, it's a no-brainer in that way.
Yeah, and I'm glad you raised that statistic about women and the fact that rarely do women lie about being sexually assaulted. That's well documented in the literature. Studies after studies show that when women come forward and tell their stories, more likely than not, they are telling the truth. And we know that, 10 years ago, when a woman came forward to tell her story of being sexually assaulted, she wasn't believed. And oftentimes she was vilified in the media. She lost her job. She lost relationships. And it was quite difficult. And we know with women finding the courage to come forward, not just with respect to Bill Cosby, but with respect to other predators, we now know that many women have found their voice. But I wanted to ask you something about, you used the word clout chaser, and we've heard that word a lot. Clout chaser, gold diggers, we've heard these derogatory terms used. And I know that at one point people accused you of being a clout chaser. So how did that make you feel? And what actually made you become such a big, activist around sexual assault, particularly with respect to Bill Cosby?
Oh, okay. That's so there are a lot of different aspects to that. Let's see. So I was called so many names, including opportunist, which is another word for clout chaser, of course. And the funny part is, people would just not do any research at all. And that goes back to the point about women being falsely accusing men. There is a profile of a woman who does that. There are studies about that. Most women that falsely accuse men, which are not a lot of women, they have a particular profile. They're like they have mental health issues. Um, well, I don't know exactly all of the study, but I was looking at the study, and there are definitely issues with those type of women, which none of the women basically in the case of Bill Cosby fall under those categories. If you look at me as an opportunist, I mean, I don't fall under that category. I've been working steadily my entire life since 8 years old. I don't need money. I don't need the clout from that. I was already on TV. I was known for way more than the Cosby Show. Like, I started my career working with Ringo Starr when I was 9 years old. I didn't need Bill Cosby to bring me up, as many people would say in the comments. Oh, he gave her a career. No, he didn't. No, and then there's just a whole bunch of things that people throw on you when
And
you
I just want to be clear, you've never sued Bill Cosby for any kind of civil damage. You've never filed a
No.
lawsuit against him. You've never sought money from him or his team.
No, and I was not personally assaulted by him. But that goes to the next issue. Why is it so hard to believe that I would feel for my sister, that I would feel for other women? Why are people saying that I can't possibly want to fight for somebody just for the fact that it's wrong, just for the fact that it touches me, that this injustice exists, that women get raped? Yes, rape has happened around me. I happen to be the lucky one that hasn't. Out of 4 women, I'm like the one that hasn't been molested or something. But I've had in my family, very, very close to me, people in my family that have been touched by this, that have been raped and molested. And this should touch everyone. It's kind of like, bring it back to George Floyd. Why is it only a Black person problem that I can't breathe? White people and people of other ethnicities should not be able to breathe when they see a person being choked to death, being crushed to death. You should also have a problem with that. I have a problem with women being raped and sexually assaulted. It doesn't have to have touched me, even though it does touch me around me and my family and everything and my friends. But it's a matter of humanity. Feminists are humanists. Like, on the very basic principle, I'm a human and I feel for other humans in pain. So that's why that issue touched me. It wasn't even about the fact that I was on the Cosby Show. The group that I'm with, which is called Femen, it's the group that protests specifically topless, in order to also bring forth the issue about why women's bodies are shamed constantly, and why it has to be such a disgusting thing or a disgraceful thing to have a nipple. Male nipples are okay, women's nipples are not okay. And so that group protests that specifically, and they were the ones that brought up, we should do this protest, and also, like, together we're brainstorming, yes, we should do this protest. They didn't know I was on the Cosby Show until after, but it touched all of us, even in
So
Europe.
you actually did stage a protest outside of the 2018 retrial that Cosby was in Pennsylvania, right?
Yes.
You were arrested outside of that trial. Tell us what happened.
We organized a protest together with the group called Femen. And because I actually had already planned to go to the United States around that time period, it was actually kind of a perfect plan to actually also do the protest. And I had been on my own working on music that includes songs about sexism, songs against racism, and songs about being human together. And when this issue came up, I had already thought to myself, oh, I'm going to do what I can do, which is I can sing and I can rap and whatever. So I'm going to write a song about it. But separate from that, my group came up with this idea for the protest. And I said, yeah, okay, yeah, I definitely want to do that too. So because I was in the States, I went in front of the steps that are supposed to be where they filmed the outside of the Cosby Show, and I wore the sweater and I put the victims' names on that sweater later on for the song that I wrote about, based on and inspired by the Cosby case, but based on all date rape and rape situations. So it's like I'm trying to
outside of that trial, you actually ran topless, right? Outside of the trial to make a statement to actually demonstrate your protest against sexual predators.
Right. And it was strange and not funny
I think
because
we
it
have
was
a picture of that. I want to have my producer put that picture up. We have this picture of you outside the,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, it was
So,
missed on people the reason why I was naked. And that's sad to me because the whole point of that was he used women's bodies. He tried to silence us and push us down and dominate our bodies. So that was an expression of saying we are alive. We are taking back control of our own bodies. And I was representing those women's bodies. It had nothing to do with people saying, "Yo, you're a prostitute, you're a stripper." Like that's that sexist thing that comes in at the end of the day as well. Why are my breasts shameful? I'm showing what he took from these women, and that should be discussed. That should be talked about. But that was kind of swept under the rug. Why was she topless? It's so crazy in America to actually show breasts. But this was so important to the movement. This was important to the protest. He did something to those women's bodies he did not have a right to do. And I was trying to activate, the group that I was in, we were trying to activate the body into a sort of more of an aggressive and not a passive state, and say, we're here. You can't just take us. We exist.
so,
And that was for all
so
those women.
I'm sorry. So you've staged this protest. You've been an outspoken advocate for women and women's rights around these issues, and then this appeal just happens. So, what were your reactions to the appeal, and what would you like to see happen at this stage with respect to the appeal?
I think it's a pretty simple argument in my head. 6 months ago, the appeal was denied, right? Why was the appeal denied? I don't know why it was denied then. And now, all of a sudden, 6 months later, they're letting him have this appeal. But probably it's related to the Black Lives Matter movement, which goes back to the original issue. And even the reason why I used the slogan, Women's Lives Matter, because he's using his black stance, his black man statute to say he's being a victim, and he's completely manipulating the narrative on that and manipulating the Black community. The Black community should be mad about that, and instead they came for me and came for the victim, saying I was a coon and a traitor. But he's the one that's actually doing what they're accusing me of doing. So it's like this projection thing.
Nicole, I take it that you think this appeal should be denied.
Oh, yes. I think it should be denied also because, for example, it's related to the statute of limitations. These 5 women could not effectively, officially have a claim because it was a few years shy of them being able to do that. Why? Does that mean the rape went away? They were never raped. They were never assaulted because of a few years, because of 1 month, and in the next state over, they've now extended the statute of limitations to 20 years in New York, whereas before it was like 5. So this is completely arbitrary. There's no reason why those women couldn't have a testimony officially. And now they're saying they shouldn't have had the testimony because it was the state of Pennsylvania. That's really arbitrary and kind of like besides the point to all of what happened. So that issue to me is just ridiculous. Like statute of limitations, what I'd like to see happen is that be completely extended in every single state in the United States. That's ridiculous. There's one state 5 years and one state 20 years for rape. Or if you were raped with a gun, you can have unlimited time, but not if you were drugged.
Well, you raise a really good point, Nicole, and there are movements happening all over the country to change the statute of limitations to allow for women and men or any victim of sexual assault to be able to bring those claims beyond what has traditionally been these really short statutes of limitations. And I want to thank you for joining me this morning and sharing, what has been important to you and why you protest and why you've been so involved in this case. Good luck to you. And again, thank you for sitting down with me this morning.
Thank you so much for having me and continuing the good fight. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Nicole. My next guest, she actually says that Bill Cosby sexually assaulted her in 1976. She came forward in 2014 after decades of silence. She has great concerns about the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's decision. Joining me is Therese Serranese. Good morning, Therese. How are you? Just turn your speaker on for us, please. There you go. Good morning, Therese. How are you?
This is my first official Zoom with somebody other than my father. So,
well, you are a pro at it already, I can tell. So thank you.
I had help last night. My son set it up for me. So.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me this morning. We're talking about reactions to this Pennsylvania Supreme Court's decision, and really beyond what may happen with Bill Cosby, but what this might mean for the Me Too movement. So unlike my earlier guest who said she didn't have a negative encounter with Bill Cosby, you actually accused Bill Cosby of sexual assault. Tell us a little about what happened with you.
Okay, first let me say, I just listened to her and I agree with everything she said. She said it beautifully. Okay, in my instance, mine happened in the 70s, in the mid 70s. Times were different back then. We women did not have a voice at all. It was a fear thing. He had power, he had money, he was elevated to such a high regard, and I was just a young girl at the time. I was a teenager. And so bringing it back to now, when I made my complaints, and I did early on, I told my family, my mother just said, well, maybe he'll take care of you. Certainly that may sound bad now, but my mother comes from a different era of time. And so you have to look at people's time period when the assaults happened to them. And us as a person, I'm 63 years old. So I'm a different person than the new younger people, just a totally different time. So it's taken me a long time to get to the journey to being confident or comfortable to speak out. Basically, I've lived in fear all my life and I am still afraid. As we sit here, the threats from the team of Bill Cosby, Camille Cosby, they keep me in fear. They have prestige, they have privilege, they have money, they have power. I don't. I'm a simple woman. So the Me Too movement, it ignited after the first trial. The first trial was in 2017. And that one had one witness from the victims. One witness was a prior.
Before we get to the trial, Teresa, I just want to ask you, just describing what you just did, the era that you grew up in, you know, the fear that you had, you know, tell us what gave you the power to come forward to talk about Cosby, because you just described something that a lot of women often describe about why they keep silent.
Okay, certain circumstances, like when you're raped as a young girl, a young woman, it affects you deeply. You lose your self-confidence. From then on, you have probably low self-esteem, lack of confidence, lack of trust, afraid of the world.
But tell us, Teresa, let's step back a little and tell us what actually happened to you. How did you meet Cosby?
My mother and father were divorced. My mother had moved to Las Vegas. I'm not sure what time period, but it was sometime in the 70s, mid 70s, probably 1976. Could have been 75. And as I said, that was in my deposition. I'm uncertain as to the date. My mother lived in Las Vegas, and me, my younger brother, my sister, and my youngest sister, we went to the Hilton by ourselves to have lunch and walk around. It was 3 blocks from where my mother lived. So we were walking around the Hilton. I believe we had lunch. We were now in the gift shop, and I was standing looking at the cosmetic or the costume jewelry with my sister on my side. Evidently, my brother was behind me and the other sister was there too. Some of this I hadn't even become aware of until the last 2 years, because we didn't.
But did you meet him in that gift shop?
Yes, I was standing there looking at the jewelry on the counter, and a person came up to me, put their arm around my neck somewhere up here, and I heard them say, "Will you marry me?" Well, I turned around to see who that was, and it was Bill Cosby. He was the headliner at the show at the time. I knew who he was. Everybody knew who he was. He was an entertainer. He was a funny guy. So I knew who he was. So I turned around. I thought that was funny. And we were all talking to him for a while. And he asked me, as well as my family members, if we would like to see his show. I said, yes, of course. Who wouldn't? And so my brother and my younger siblings were underage, and they couldn't go to the show because the show was later at night. Evidently, the show that I was getting allowed to go to maybe was the 9 o'clock show. And so I went by myself.
Ended up at the show.
Yes.
And I think from watching some other interviews, you said you ended up backstage after that show, right?
Yes. The people from the hotel got me into my seat. They escorted me to my seat. And then afterwards, the people, I don't know who they were, but the show people came and got me and escorted me out. Now, I've never been to the show there. I didn't know. I just followed them. I'm a young girl, 18, 19 years old. So I followed them. What it was a meet and greet. They have them nowadays, meet and greets.
So you actually met him backstage, and that's where the sexual assault, that's where you alleged the sexual assault occurred?
Yes, yes. So I was very shy. This was Bill Cosby. He was famous. He was a celebrity. He was 20 years older than me. So I was just a young girl being able to see this entertainment.
Were you, is a part of what you say happened to you, Therese, did it involve drugs? Did it involve him giving you anything?
Yes. So I was in there and there was many people, 10 to 30. I don't really even know. There was a bunch of people there, all happy. I don't recall anybody drinking, and I was not drinking. They were talking to him, laughing. I do remember that. And I was just there, quiet, standing there. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, because I was probably in awe of being in this room with this, comedian star, Bill Cosby. And so I just stood there and waited for someone to tell me what to do. I thought they brought me in this room when it's time to take me out.
So let me ask you this, though. At some point, do you recall being in the room alone with yourself and be alone with Bill Cosby and believing that you were sexually assaulted by him?
Little by little, the people left, made me a little bit more nervous. And then finally, only I was in the room. By that time, I was probably sitting on the couch, on the end of the couch. And I recall him coming over. He had his hand out and he said, "Take these." And they were 2 large white pills in his hand. Had a glass of water. "Take these." Well, now I'm in the room alone. Not a confident woman, passive woman. Even in Bill Cosby's deposition, he knew I was a passive woman. I was scared. I went to Catholic school. I took the pills. I didn't have any knowledge of what was going to be happening afterwards. I was just scared in the interim. In the moment, I did as I was told, like a child, like a schoolgirl.
Let me ask you this, Therese. I know that you've talked about how painful this experience was, but you joined a group of women around 2015 who were interviewed by the New York Times. So this big piece. What gave you the courage to come forward and to be a part of that big New York Times story?
Well, believe me, in 2005, when I saw that Andrea Constand made a complaint, I saw it. And I wanted to tell, because I had waited all my life for someone to hear me, because this was something I suffered with all of my life. And I made a report to the police department. I called them up. I said, "Let me tell you, I've got a story too." And they said, "Well, write out this little page, of what happened, send it in, fax it to us." I did. And so I thought, oh, good. Now he's going to get in trouble. Something's going to happen. Somebody's going to listen. And so evidently what happened was, that was the time probably Bruce Castor came in and decided he wasn't going to prosecute. I found out just by reading in the newspaper or online or something that the case had been dropped.
Let me ask you this, Teresa. So you followed what happened in the first trial and you followed what happened in the second trial. How do you feel now, knowing that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has granted this appeal? How does that make you feel?
Yeah, let me say, I was a Jane Doe in Andrea Constand civil suit. In the 2017 lawsuit, there was 13 women that the prosecution wanted to come forward to testify as prior bad acts witnesses. I was one of them. They only selected one. In the second trial, the prosecution wanted 19 prior bad acts witnesses. I was one of those as well. The judge only allowed 5. So in my mind, Bill Cosby got a great deal. There were 60 plus women with stories of some kind of harassment, sexual violation, and outright drug rape. So I think he got a great deal. And so now we're at I went to his first appeal. I was, I feel that I wanted to do this not only for myself, but I had a daughter, and my daughter was raped when she was 14 years old. And so I didn't just do it for myself. I did it for all the young girls in the world, because so many of us suffer. Young girls, young boys, we find out that there's so many people suffering. So this wasn't just a mission for myself. This was to try to change something and give all of us a voice. And so that's what made me come forward. Is I always wanted to tell. The world wouldn't let us. There was many women that I'm sure wanted a voice, but we never had the opportunity.
And Therese, I know this is painful to discuss, but do you have a vivid memory of what happened to you after he gave you those pills?
Yeah, I do. I have all my life tried to forget it, of course, when nothing's going to come of it. But there's some things that you can't ever forget, because when trauma and something horrible happens to you, it burns in your memory. And so even after almost 30 something years, when I gave my first television interview, it just came right to my head because I didn't forget it. So yes, I do remember after I took the pills, the next memory was I must have passed out. And my next memory was I didn't have any clothes on. And I was bent over, and I was next to a mirror, a big, large dressing room mirror. So I could see by turning my head, and I saw I was being raped, bending forward. So I saw that, and I never forgot that. Plus he was very verbal. He was very verbal. He was saying a lot of dirty things that I had never heard before. It was shocking. I didn't feel I could move. My head would go in and out because my next memory, I don't know where I was the next memory, but I remember that. And so another memory, I guess my next memory would be that I was outside in the dark. I felt drugged, and I was just left out in the dark.
I'm so sorry to hear that, Therese, and definitely sorry to hear about your daughter. So I'll just ask you, what would you like to see happen with regard to this appeal?
Well, I guess in the world, everybody has their shot at a best fair trial. I did see I never missed a moment of the trial. I went to both of them. I saw everything. I even went to jury selection. It was just something important to me. I really thought he was going to get away with it because I thought people love him too much. All he needs is one. And so I know he needs, this is the process it goes through, but for what he has done, his crimes against so many women, he's only being charged for one. And he won't admit it. He won't say sorry. He has no remorse for the crimes he committed, as well as his wife calls us outright liars. She appears to say that we're liars, women like us. What is that actually saying? Women that are violated by a man, what is she actually saying? I deserve to be heard, and now I am being heard, but he deserves to be in that jail cell because he assaulted Andrea Constand. The jury found him guilty. It was a completely fair trial, and he deserves to be there. So I'll go to the appeal. I'll do whatever I can to make my presence there, to follow through on this, because this man hurt people. And if we start this has gone on all through time. Like Nicole said, only 2% are ever found guilty. They all virtually get away with it. Crimes against women or children, this is not fair. We deserve to have people prosecuted for these horrific, life-altering crimes. In America, money is more valued than a woman's life and body. That's a shame.
Well, I think you said something really that struck me, Therese, and that's that you deserve to be heard and you are being heard. And women all over this country are for the first time being heard. And as a civil rights lawyer that's been doing this work for a long time, that hasn't always been the case. So thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for the advocacy that you're doing, as you said, not just for yourself and your daughter, but for other girls and young women. Again, thank you for sitting down with me.
Thank you so much.
Wow, so we've heard a lot about these prior bad act witnesses, and we know in the first trial there was one witness, and in the second trial there's 5, and that's the subject matter, one of the key issues on the appeal that's before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So I now get to catch up with 2 of the brightest legal minds in the country who have been working on these issues of sexual assault, and they know what's going on with this appeal, and they're here to help us understand what some of the legal issues are. So my first guest is criminal defense attorney and author Sarah Asari. Sarah is the author of Unprecedented. She's joining us this morning, and also New York's victims' rights attorney and principal at Smith Mullen PC, Nancy Erica Smith. Good morning, Sarah. Good morning, Nancy.
Good morning, Ariva.
I couldn't think of 2 smarter women to sit down and talk to about this issue. Man, how important is this, Sarah, criminal defense attorney, for a defendant to get the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania to say, yeah, there may be some mistakes that happen at the trial court that we need to review? That sounds pretty stunning, and it sounds like a big victory to me. What do you think?
It is, Ariva. It already is a victory that the Supreme Court, the highest court of Pennsylvania, has agreed to hear this appeal. And I just want to start out by commending Therese for telling her story, having a platform, and for you to give her that platform, because frankly, the women that were not able to get their day in court, were not there to testify, were deprived of that opportunity. But with all due respect, Cosby did not get a deal. Cosby was convicted. Cosby was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison, of which he served 2 years. So I understand that justice to Therese and women in her position is for him to be in there as long as he possibly can, but law and procedure allows an appeal to be brought. And so Cosby's appeal is based on 2 grounds, essentially. One is the idea that these prior bad act witnesses, 5 of them, should not have been allowed to testify because their testimony or the incidents that they accounted for were too remote in time and too dissimilar to the conduct as against Andrea Constant. The second basis is basically that the trial court should not have allowed the trial to go forward because a DA, the predecessor of the DA that brought the case, had made a promise of immunity to Cosby based on which he testified at a civil deposition, a parallel proceeding, thinking that he can give up his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and freely testify about giving quaaludes to women, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just want to address both of these grounds. The first one with respect to the prior bad act witnesses, I think is a losing argument. I think that courts, prosecution often and for good reason brings in prior bad act witnesses to establish a pattern of abusive conduct. It is critical to their case. And while they shouldn't be allowed to bring in 19 different women to tell, the same sort of redundant story, I think 5 is not an unreasonable number. The fact that their accounts might be remote in time will impact their credibility, but it doesn't absolve the admissibility of that evidence. So, and frankly, the incidents they're accounting for do not need to be identical to what happened to Constant. It's not like they were testifying to shoplifting in a sexual assault case, right? They were still testifying to sexual assault, drugging by Bill Cosby. So I don't agree with that basis as being anything viable or winnable. On the other
Hold on a second, Sarah. I want to get Nancy's take on that before we get to the second reason for the appeal. So Nancy, what do you think? Do you think that the appeals court is getting it right by looking at what the trial court did in terms of letting those 5 witnesses testify? Here's my issue. I'm going to play devil's advocate. In that 2017 trial, the same judge said one lady, one witness, one prior bad act witness gets to testify. A year later, 2018, he says, now I'm going to let 5 testify. So what happened between 2017 and 2018 that would justify going from 1 witness to 5 witnesses? And isn't that going to be a problem for the prosecution in this case, Nancy? Nancy, turn on your, unmute yourself, please. Nancy, are you unmuted? Turn up. We're trying to get Nancy's audio working. Let's give it a minute. All this home broadcasting we have to do. Oh, Nancy's having a problem with her audio while she's
You know, you can probably tell her in a chat that to turn it on. Isn't the chat, isn't that? Oh, she can? Okay.
Yeah, no, she's trying to get it fixed. Go ahead, Sarah, you go ahead, jump in. Tell us what happened from 2017 to 2018.
Right. Well, we had, you know, the Me Too movement really took off in the fall of 2017. And we then entered a whole different era of believability of women. And I think that that has completely changed the landscape of
But Sarah, wait a minute. You're telling me that a trial court sitting in a courthouse is watching what's happening with a hashtag on social media and what's happening in the court of public opinion and then making decisions about someone's life?
Well, no, they're not making a decision about someone's life, but on the other hand, there is tremendous pressure to change the way that things have been done. You know, the way that victims would come forward and not be believed, the way that evidence would be limited in these cases. I think that things have changed drastically. We've seen statute of limitations be removed or be lengthened. We've seen more witnesses be allowed to testify. We've seen women believed, like in the Weinstein trial, without any corroboration, which is where I have a problem with the movement, where it trumps an individual's due process rights and constitutional rights. But you know, the prosecution and trials of sexual assault cases after the fall of 2017 is very different from what it was ever before. And I don't know if you want me to go ahead with the second basis.
But I guess I'm having some problems with that. And I can imagine that people who don't, you know, Nancy, can you hear us yet? We're still trying to get Nancy back. We're trying to get Nancy's volume and her audio back. But Sarah, I guess the problem is that people watching this are going to say, wait a minute, you're saying this public pressure caused this judge to make a different evidentiary decision. What if, you know, 6 months from now, the movement changes in a different direction? Are judges going to be, you know, batted around like a tennis ball and making decisions based on what public opinion is at that time?
Well, look, Ariba, I think that you and I both litigate. We know this, that there is a correlation between, you know, there is somewhat a correlation between the court of public opinion and the court of law in the sense of the trends and the movements that we see happening. I don't think the judge was outrageous in allowing 5 women to testify. I think if he had allowed 19, I think we'd be having a different conversation.
But Sarah, in 2017, he said 1, and then he jumps from 1 to 5. Why not 5 in 2017? Because we heard Therese say that there were 13 women put forth by the prosecutor in 2017. Therese said she was one of those 13. So why not 5 in 2017?
You know, I don't really know what the judge considered in this particular case in terms of going along with the prosecution's theory that the more the merrier, the more witnesses we have, the stronger our case, and the judge allowing it. But I think that definitely 5 is worse than 1. 13 or 19 would be completely unacceptable. I think that those testimonies would be just repetitive and duplicate, and I think they'd be more prejudicial than probative. And so the judge has to consider, what are these women offering in testimony? Are they saying the same exact thing and we're just putting in the power of numbers? Or is there something relevant and a little bit different in each of their stories? And I think when you piece these 5 women's testimony together, you might see that it maybe paints a better, bigger picture than the testimony of just one witness.
And I have to tell you, Sarah, I'm pretty nervous. You said you're not too concerned about what happens on appeal with respect to that aspect of what the court is reviewing. That makes me nervous. And here's why. I agree with you that prior bad act witnesses, there's an exception in the Pennsylvania law that allows those kinds of witnesses to testify in the kind of case that, the prosecution of Bill Cosby. In similar cases, there is that exception. But I think the issue that anyone would have to have looking at this objectively is nothing changed about that case from 2017 to 2018. And I don't think pointing to the public pressure or the court of public opinion, any of that is going to be persuasive to the Supreme Court justices in Pennsylvania looking at this case. So I think, that the prosecution probably has a problem with that argument, because I don't know what the justification is going to be that's going to be acceptable to a court when you see that change from 1 to 5. But let's move on to that second point you mentioned. You talk about the prior district attorney making that promise to Bill Cosby that if he testifies at this deposition, he won't be prosecuted. That was a pretty stunning, issue that came up. And we had that prior prosecutor actually testify on behalf of Cosby, saying, yeah, I did make him that promise.
Right. And I think that when you're dealing with a defendant's constitutional right to remain silent under the Fifth Amendment, I can't think of a more important constitutional protection, at least when it comes to my clients. And so when a district attorney makes a representation of immunity to a defendant, be it Bill Cosby or the average Joe, and that defendant then relies upon that immunity and makes admissions under oath that are against his interest, namely that he has given quaaludes to women, that he's had sex with women under the influence, that is damning evidence against him at a trial. And so for the court to say, well, that guy didn't have the authority to do that, so too bad, we're going to go ahead and let you go to trial, was absolutely mind-boggling. And that was something I struggled with from the minute that Cosby got charged and was proceeding to trial. And so I think that, the right thing on appeal would be to say, no, when a DA makes a representation, especially of immunity to a defendant, and they're admitting that they did that. It's not like they're saying we never said that or we never offered him that. They're not denying it. Like you said, he testified that he gave him that assurance or that protection. I think they need to be bound by it. It doesn't matter whether that DA is out of his seat, dead, gone, whatever. It binds.
So let's go with that, Sarah. So I think Nancy's back and she's joining us. Good morning, Nancy.
Good morning. I'm so sorry. I'm at my shore house and didn't have the right setup, I guess.
Oh, don't worry about it. We're just glad you can join us. Just give us your take. What are you feeling about this appeal? Do you think the appellate court is about to do something, that's going to shock the world in terms of this trial?
What I'm feeling about this appeal is that for centuries and more, powerful men have gotten away with abusing women. And finally, we are in an era where serial sexual abusers, Roger Ailes, Bill Cosby, Bill O'Reilly, Matt Lauer, Charlie Rose, Harvey Weinstein, have abused women literally for decades, and they're powerful. So to say that political prosecutors have the authority to make a deal with these powerful men, Epstein, for example, I think has to be examined. Whether you have authority as a lawyer is examined all the time. We just had to enforce in New Jersey a settlement that we had with a judge who told a woman that if she didn't want to be raped, she should keep her legs closed. And what the issue was whether his lawyer had authority to settle. So does the prosecutor have authority on behalf of the state to say to a serial rapist, yeah, I won't prosecute you. Go say what you did. And he does. What if he was a murderer? It doesn't seem correct, and it seems rooted in, I mean, in the abstract, you can argue it, but it's rooted in powerful men have been raping and abusing women since the beginning of time and getting away with it. And we need to change it, and we need to change it now. So if we have to look at things differently, we need to. Rule 413 on the other topic clearly gives us the right to introduce other sexual acts, the evidence.
But Nancy, help us understand, again, I'm playing devil's advocate here, and I think it's hard for people to understand how this judge allowed one woman to testify in the first trial, but then allows 5. Some would argue that he should have allowed the entire 13 in the first trial and the entire 19 in the second.
I would argue that definitely. I would argue as many women as want to come forward, they're subject to cross-examination. And Rule 413 allows you to bring in other victims of sexual assault. So the judge is he learned something. I think he was shocked that Cosby wasn't convicted, honestly. Now, do we want a justice system where judges act on whim? No. Have we had that, and has it gone against people of color and women for centuries? Yes. So,
so what's your take? I've got to get out of this segment, and I got another guest waiting, but I want to know, give Nancy and Sarah, what do you think is going to happen with this appeal? Sarah, you first. Is this appeal going any place, and is Cosby going to get out? That's the real question here.
Right. Just real quick to Nancy's point about, people of color. What bothered me was Camille Cosby's response. She's remained largely silent throughout this whole ordeal. And now she's speaking up, and she's saying that because Cosby is Black, she's essentially pulling the race card on the Me Too movement and saying because he's Black, and historically, unfortunately, and I agree with her, we've had this record of white women falsely accusing Black men of rape and sexual assault and getting away with it, that's what happened to her husband. I disagree with that. I think it's a dangerous proposition. I think the Me Too movement is colorblind and equal opportunity. I think it's a movement about men of power abusing women and silencing them and getting away with it. That's what we're talking about here. And Cosby, by virtue of a celebrity, has his skin color neutralized. I mean, he is America's dad, the powerful Hollywood, star, the guy. And so I don't think it's because he's Black that so many women came forward and accused him. He could have been anybody. He could have been Weinstein. He could have been his fellow.
So what's going to happen? Tell us, bottom line, is this appeal getting granted or is it getting denied?
I think the appeal is more likely to get granted on the issue of the DA's immunity that was granted and then taken out by the judge.
So we're going to see a new trial. We're going to see Cosby released from prison. What's going to happen?
Well, I think that you're not going to get a new trial. Number one, there's double jeopardy. Number two, if the judge rules, if the appellate court rules that they should have never tried this case because they had given him immunity, then what's the DA going to do? They're out. They're done. And so
Cosby walks. Is that your prediction? Your prediction is that he walks?
I would say he's got a 65 to 70% chance of walking on this appeal.
What do you say, Nancy? Is he going to walk?
I don't think he can walk in this climate. I think that it's not going to happen. I think that they will find a way to keep him in prison. But I do very much appreciate what Sarah just said. As somebody who represents Meredith Watson, one of the 2 Black women who have accused the Virginia lieutenant governor of raping them, she has gotten vicious pushback, and it's so painful to her. And regularly I get followed on Twitter by people screaming at me for representing Meredith Watson. And one of the hashtags that had some legs was "Feminism is racism." Now, to say that to Black women who have been raped, as an institution,
well, let's just be clear. Black women suffer more sexual assault than non-Black women. So we need to be really clear about that. And I do want to give Sarah a little pushback, Sarah, in terms of the Me Too movement. even the founder, Tarana Burke of the Me Too movement, says that the movement is not colorblind. So there are some race issues that have been, prevalent and continue to rear its ugly head, even with respect to the Me Too movement. But I find what you just said, Nancy, to be appalling, that you're getting pushback because you're representing an African-American woman simply
Yes.
because she's accusing the Black lieutenant governor of rape.
Yes.
Absurd,
Yeah.
ridiculous, and crazy.
Yeah. It's brutal on my client. Brutal, I got to tell you, because she expected some support, and it's been pretty brutal.
Wow. So you think Cosby doesn't walk?
I think he doesn't walk. I think that the judges, I think they're political creatures. We see today on the abortion ruling, Roberts is afraid of his legacy, and he's reading the political times. And they're as political as anybody. And I just don't see them letting Cosby walk in this environment. As much as I agree with some of the legal arguments, Sarah's a very, very good lawyer, and her legal arguments are very sound. I do think judges are political creatures, and I don't think they can let him walk.
Well, I've got to leave it there, ladies. I could talk to Sarah and Nancy all day. We could chop it up about all these legal issues, because it's quite interesting that the court even decided to take it up in this climate. You mentioned the climate, Nancy. I was shocked that the court even took up this appeal, given the climate that we find ourselves in. Yep. So I hope that you are right. I hope that the court we'll read the tea leaves, like you're right, that Justice Roberts is doing on the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, not the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. But this is such an interesting case, and it comes at such an interesting time. And Sarah, you brought up the statement of Camille Cosby, and my next guest, who I'm going to bring in now, Dominique DePrima, she's a talk radio host here in Los Angeles, and she has her finger on the pulse of what the community is thinking about, this intersectionality. And we see it all the time between, race and gender, and how it's playing itself out with respect to the protests following George Floyd's murder, as well as how it plays itself out in the Me Too movement. Good morning, Dominique. How are you? Thank you so much. Before I say hello to you, Dominique, let me thank Sarah and Nancy for joining me. You guys are amazing. Some of the best lawyers in the country. And I'll be talking with you again. We're going to keep following this case and see what happens with regards to this appeal. And hopefully, Sarah, you're wrong.
Barely.
We won't walk. But good morning, Dominique. Thank you for joining me. I know you've been in the green room. You've been able to hear this very interesting conversation about Cosby and what's going on with him. And I wanted to talk with you because I know, as a talk radio host for KJLH here in Los Angeles, one of the biggest markets in the country, that you've interviewed women, you've interviewed victims, you've interviewed activists. So tell me what the streets are saying about, this Cosby appeal. And then we're going to talk about Camille Cosby and her pretty explosive statement comparing her husband to Emmett Till. But tell me, just kind of your first reaction to hearing that this appeal was even being considered by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court.
Good morning, Reva. Yes, thank you for having me. Well, my first reaction was I was kind of surprised that he was going to get an appeal. And listening to all of you attorneys talk, I can see all of the arguments that you're saying make sense. It does still surprise me. As you said, I talk with people every single day. I've been talking with lots of African-American and Latino people every single morning for the past 15 years. And I understand that there are a lot of people in the community that feel that Cosby was a victim, that he's been targeted because he wanted to buy NBC, that he was targeted because he's wealthy and Black. And there is a lot of, this was where I took an unpopular opinion on my own show, because my feeling is that, yes, of course there's racism. We live in a society with systemic racism, which touches every institution, educational, financial, legal, the incarceration system. So of course there's systemic racism. And of course, the Me Too movement is part of that. It couldn't magically somehow be on a cloud outside of our society and the sort of hierarchy of importance that we give to lives in this society, which is why we have to say Black Lives Matter. But at the same time, a lot of people, you want to say colorblind, I don't think it exists, but the reality is a lot of women came forward. This is not he said, she said, this is he said, everybody said, right? So I think that's a little different. I also think I love Camille Cosby, but you can't compare a multi-millionaire with top lawyers and endless resources to Emmett Till, a
Well,
teenager.
let me put her
murdered.
statement up, Dominique. We actually have the statement that Camille gave to ABC Live. I'm just going to read a part of it. She says, the Me Too movement and movements like them have intentional ignorance pertaining to the history of particular white women, not all white women, but particular white women who have from the very beginning pertaining to the enslavement of African people, accused Black males of sexual assault without any proof whatsoever. No proof anywhere on the face of the earth. She continued by saying they need to clean up their act. So, that's Camille speaking as a, devoted wife, but she talks about the Me Too movement and movements like them having intentional ignorance. What do you think of that statement?
Well, I mean, Dr. Camille Cosby is a PhD. I think, she's speaking also as a student of history, not just as a wife. But I think that in this case, they are hiding behind our history to avoid dealing with the facts. I mean, the facts are, it's not just one random white woman with no evidence. We are talking about a lot of women, not all of them white. We are talking about evidence, and whether or not that grand jury or the testimony should have been, the deposition should have been admitted or not. The fact is, there was other evidence. There is a pattern here. And I'm not a lawyer, but to compare it to Emmett Till, to me, I think it's kind of disrespectful to the memory of Emmett Till, a very young boy who was murdered brutally for whistling at a white woman with no evidence whatsoever. That's just not the same as being a wealthy superstar who has lawyers to defend him against, scores of women who say he's.
Yeah, and anyone on the planet that doesn't know who Emmett Till is, he was a 15-year-old boy who was lynched in 1955 after he was accused of flirting with a white woman. And that white woman, before she died, actually came forward and said that it didn't happen, that he wasn't flirting with her, and that it was all made up, and it caused it caused him to be lynched, and it caused a major awakening in this country because his mother so bravely and so courageously allowed his casket to be opened, and for back then Jet Magazine to photograph it, and for the nation to see the brutality that had happened to her young son simply because he was Black. And simply because someone, and that someone being a white woman, had accused him of flirting with her. So, Camille tries to make this somehow comparison between what happened to Emmett Till and I guess some metaphorical lynching of her husband. And I think probably most people would disagree and would say, as you just said so eloquently, Dominique, that is disrespectful of the legacy and the memory of Emmett Till. Obviously, Bill Cosby did not lose his life.
Right. At the same time, I mean, you don't have to go all the way back to Emmett Till. We do have Brian Banks. We do have the Central Park Five. We do have a history of racism in this country, and we do have a history of false accusations of rape. So I can understand why people feel
no disagreement about that. And I think everybody can agree that there is an ugly history in this country of Black men being falsely accused of raping white women. And we can keep Emmett Till's memory out of it because I just don't even think it's an appropriate reference. Right. But let's talk about, though, something Camille did say that I think is deserving of more conversation. And it's her challenge. She called out the Me Too movement and basically said she thought it was steeped in racism. And in preparing for the show, I went back to see, was she a sole voice on that issue? And I found an actual speech that Tarana Burke, who is the original founder of the phrase and of the movement Me Too, and Tarana gave a speech in Detroit a couple of years ago, where she challenged too, and she challenged the Me Too movement and spoke to Black women saying, we're not abandoning you because this has become such a Hollywood, it's been in some ways, some people's words, co-opted by some white actresses in Hollywood. She wanted to reassure Black women that their voices were still important. And the reason she started the movement was to highlight the stories of Black women and girls who have been sexually assaulted. So have you, in your experience, all the people you've interviewed, have you seen Black women say to you that they feel like they've been left out of the Me Too movement?
Well, I think when that comes up is precisely when we're dealing with a case like Bill Cosby. And the reason for that is not just the history. And by the way, to the hashtag feminism is racism, people go back to Margaret Sanger and the early racism of the feminist movement, which did exclude Black women. And people are still upset about that. And then you look at, Woody Allen. Yeah, they say, they shut down his book, but his movies are still being played. He still gets Academy Awards. You look at the treatment of some of these, the president of the United States, multiple accusations against him, and yet it all seems to be nowhere in the conversation. So, I mean, it does seem like even though we are calling out now powerful men of all races, the consequences are always much stronger for Black men, and even smaller, not talking about Cosby, but in other cases, smaller situations are much bigger for Black men, and they never are allowed to move on or redeem themselves as someone like, William Bennett, who says all, Black people should be aborted and then goes on and gets to have his own talk show. I mean, so there is a double standard.
Yeah, I think one of the things that bothered me when I was doing the research about the movement, and the movement is no doubt incredibly powerful, and it has given a voice to women, across the world. And again, I always reference back to my early days as a civil rights lawyer and representing women who have been either sexually harassed, sexually assaulted, and remembering what those days were like when, if you did come forward as a woman, you were instantly vilified. No one believed you. Your entire sexual past was brought out to, color you as a slut, as a hoe, as every negative, word you can think of for a woman. And how now, when women speak out, they are more inclined, not always, because we saw it with the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, but in, more cases than not, women at least are given a platform. Women are being listened to by district attorneys. We're seeing more cases brought against, powerful men and non-powerful men. So I don't think we could ever discount the value and the power of the Me Too movement. But I was kind of disturbed because Cyntoia Brown, this young woman who was forced into sex trafficking, some horrific pimp is, beating her and abusing her. She kills him. She's in jail now for life. And there's this movement to free her. Advocates for justice are trying to get her released because she was just a victim of this system. And some researchers at a very prominent college said that the Me Too movement was silent on Cyntoia's case, and they weren't speaking up for her, this young Black woman who was, serving a life sentence. So I think it's those kinds of stories that they cause people to have some questions and concerns about how do we have a movement that's inclusive of everybody. Did you follow that case at all? And any thoughts about what happened in that case, and how do we move to, particularly now, this is George Floyd, this is reckoning time, right? This is every institution looking at themselves, seeing what they can do better, not to just say they're not a racist, but to be actively anti-racist. So any thoughts about how the Me Too movement can take advantage of this opportunity? This is the time.
Well, I think you're right that the Me Too movement is powerful and important. I don't mean to say it's not, but it's also new. And in the formative stages of any movement, they make mistakes and they got to fix it. I don't know that it's true that no one spoke out about Cyntoia Brown. I think a lot of celebrities were speaking out about her case. And I think it's one of the reasons why we saw action in her.
Well, I think these researchers said, and maybe everybody that's the Me Too movement gets lumped in together. I think the researchers' point was they didn't see a lot of the high profile white women who are typically associated with Me Too. Obviously, women all over the country moved in powerful ways to cause this young lady to be released from prison. I think the claim is that powerful white women who would normally be outspoken on these issues were relatively quiet.
Yeah, fair point. I mean, the Hollywood types I'm thinking of are all women of color who spoke out for Cyntoia Brown. I do think it is an opportunity. And one of the other mistakes, which, you kind of touched on, is this due process piece, because to me, Al Franken should still be a senator. It's ridiculous that he stepped down. It was an accusation that wasn't even fully vetted. So, yeah, they have got to, because I would consider myself a part of the Me Too movement, we have got to fix that. There has to be due process. There has to be equity, inclusion, and Black lives have to matter. They have to matter too. And they have to matter just as much and all the time. And on the reverse side of that, white predators have to be just as accountable. They have to be held to just as high of a standard as our Black men. And right now, that's not happening.
Well, we've got to leave it there, Dominique. Thank you for joining me. I always know that I'm going to get a very honest and very real assessment from you. You are talking to people every day, as you said on your show, the front page with Dominique DePrima on KJLH. I always love joining you on your show, and so was a treat to have you join me on my show. So
Yes,
the role
thank you
reversal
so
today.
much.
Keep lifting your voice and being such a powerful voice for African-American women, African-American people. And I look forward to joining you again on the front page.
Please do. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Wow. Thanks to all of my guests today. This is the kind of conversation literally for a civil rights lawyer that I could just have all day. I could just talk to women all day about these issues because one, I'm personally interested in them. And two, I think they touch on the lives of everybody. So everybody has a mother, right? Everybody has a sister. Everybody has a girlfriend. So when we talk about Me Too and these issues of sexual assault, they're not just female issues. These are people issues. And I think that's what's so important and what's been so powerful about the Me Too movement. Thanks everybody for joining me today. Don't forget to follow me at Areva Martin. Don't forget to follow Special Needs Network, Special Needs Network. A big thanks to my sponsor, Special Needs Network, and to my incredible production team. Before I get out here, just a couple of words to live by. Here's the deal. Bill Cosby didn't make the Me Too movement, and he can't break it. And lawyers can debate what the ultimate outcome of Cosby's appeal will be and whether accusers whose cases are not being charged should be allowed to testify in sexual assault cases. That's an argument that is never ending by some of the best lawyers in the country. And you can hear lawyers, on TV talking about this issue. But as every issue in law, again, you're going to find credible arguments on both sides. You're going to find legal scholars and practicing attorneys who say allowing such witnesses is highly prejudicial and deprives the accused of his presumption of innocence. Others will counter and they'll say if the accusations fit a pattern, they are relevant. And in this new era that anybody that has a valid accusation against an accused should be able to come into court and testify. And as Nancy said, that person's credibility can be judged and jurors are sophisticated and they'll know if the person's story is believable or not. Jurors can determine if prior bad acts establish a modus operandi. So to completely bar such testimony, in my opinion, is wrong, and it ignores the value of that testimony. And I hope that the judges in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court sees it that way. And I hope that they determine that the judge was within his legal right and that he exercised his judicial discretion properly by allowing those 5 women to testify. But, kind of what happens beyond Cosby's appeal and everyone associated with this case, I think and I hope that the conversation inspires people to action. And you don't have to agree with Camille Cosby about, her reference to Emmett Till, and you see Dominique and I don't. You don't have to equate what happened to Cosby to that horrific lynching of Emmett Till. You don't even have to agree that granting the appeal is a form of vindication, as his wife has suggested. But you shouldn't ignore the comments that Camille Cosby made about race in the Me Too movement. Because as I indicated in doing my research, those comments are not unique to Camille Cosby. There are countless articles, studies, and reports of Black women and girls feeling left out of the movement that was started by a Black woman to help other Black women get help, share their stories, and to ultimately heal. That Black woman somehow feel left out of this movement is a problem. And in the words of Professor Allison Hobbs, despite the enduring legacy of testimony by Black women, white women have often played the protagonist in the history of sexual violence, and Black women have been relegated to the supporting cast. In the wake of George Floyd's murder and the reckoning that the entire country is experiencing, the time is now. It's now to change that narrative. Now is the time to do better by all women, to listen to and to understand the historical and the contemporary circumstances that shape their experiences. Now is the time for Black, white, Latinx, Asian, and all women to stand in unity and to speak out against sexual violence and to say with one loud and resounding voice that it's time's up for predators. Thanks, y'all. That's all for me. I will see you on Wednesday at 9 a.m. as we talk about COVID-19 and the reopening of America's schools. Yes, parents on opposite sides of this debate on whether they're going to send their kids back to school in the fall. And I go one-on-one with leading education experts to get their response to Donald Trump's demand that schools open, and they open immediately. I'll see you on Wednesday at 9 a.m. And until then, be safe out there. And remember, we are all in this together.